Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Tax time is seasonal, but the Taxpayer Bill of Rights applies all year. Tax tip 2021-05, January 21st, 2021. All taxpayers have fundamental rights when they're interacting with the IRS. These rights apply all year long, not just during tax season. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights presents these rights in 10 categories. There's a link to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights here if you want to look at that in more depth. Here's an overview of these rights and links to details about each one. The right to be informed. Taxpayers have the right to know what is required to comply with the tax laws. So there's a link to the right to be informed. So obviously they can't just say, hey, you had an obligation to do this type of thing and you didn't do it and therefore you're in trouble, but you didn't know exactly what it is that you needed to do due to lack of being informed. That would not be right. So you also have the right to quality service. Taxpayers have the right to receive prompt, courteous, and professional assistance when working with the IRS and the freedom to speak to a supervisor about inadequate services. So the right to service when you're dealing with the IRS, the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax. So there's a link to that, of course. Taxpayers have the right to pay only the amount of tax legally due, including interest and penalties. So when you're thinking about taxes, of course, you're only obligated to pay taxes that are required under the law. Obviously, you can opt in to pay more money if you feel like that might be a way to do some good in the world. But I think most people that look at this objectively would say, hey, you should be paying as little taxes as possible. And if you want to help out the world, don't give the money to the government. Give it to some kind of charity that you can research and give it to in that way. But the basic idea here is, of course, that you're paying the taxes that are going to be legally required to pay, and you're not required to pay any more than would be the legal requirements to pay for the taxes. Next one, the right to challenge the IRS's position and be heard. So there's a link to that here. Taxpayers have the right to object to formal IRS actions or proposed actions and provide justification with additional documentation. So we have the tax law that is going to be the tax law, but of course if the IRS takes a position in the tax law that we do not think is proper, we can basically challenge that position and go through the process, the formal process, the legal process of challenging a position. So the right to appeal an IRS decision in an independent forum. So taxpayers are entitled to a fair and impartial administrative appeal of the IRS decisions, including certain penalties. So again, if the IRS takes a position, then we can basically appeal that decision and basically argue that decision in an impartial administrative appeals. So the right to finality. The taxpayers have the right to know the maximum amount of time they have to challenge the IRS position and the maximum amount of time the IRS must audit a particular tax year or collect a tax debt. So we can't have the process basically go on forever in this case, right? We got to be able to know, what's the time frame that we have in order to act, and what's the time frame generally that the IRS has in order to act. The right to privacy. Taxpayers have the right to expect that any IRS inquiry, examination, or enforcement action will comply with the law and be no more intrusive than necessary. And this is kind of obviously a big deal when you talk about audits and whatnot with the IRS. What can the IRS do with regards to the audit? How much can they invade the privacy in order to look into a particular situation? So we've got some issues there, of course, with the ability to maintain your private rights while complying with your tax obligations as well, and dealing with the IRS is trying to make sure that everybody is complying with basically their obligations as a taxpayer. The right to confidentiality. Taxpayers have the right to expect that their tax information will remain confidential. So obviously the IRS shouldn't be and isn't typically leaking your tax information to other people and whatnot for nefarious purposes or anything like that. It should be something that's going to be confidential between you and the IRS. It's going to be the tax records. So we need to have, of course, trust with the institution in order to have the tax, relationship work properly. The right to retain representation. Taxpayers have the right to retain an authorized representative of their choice to represent them in their interactions with the IRS. So that would be similar to a lawyer if you were to have them represent you for some kind of legal case. They're acting in that case as your agent. The reason we would need some kind of agent typically would be that you're in an area of specialized knowledge, therefore you need assistance from someone that has that kind of specialized knowledge. Similar kind of situation with the IRS. If you're dealing with the IRS, you might want someone that has more specific knowledge in certain circumstances, such as an audit or something like that. That's where like CPAs might be able to play that role that would be similar to a role of an attorney, or an attorney might be something that can act as the agent and so on in those types of situations. So the right to a fair and just tax system. Taxpayers have the right to expect fairness from the tax system. This includes considering all facts and circumstances that might affect their liabilities, ability to pay, or provide information timely. So more information can be found below in the publication 1, Your Rights as a Taxpayer. There's a link to that here. There's a link to those 10 items. So if any one of those you want to look for more information about those particular rights, there'll be links to those here, and there'll be a link to this in the description.